have you ever been in a fight? No, good. And by that, I mean, some of us might be thinking like, fisticuffs. Some of us might be, a midnight duel. Some of us might be in a disagreement with a spouse or a partner, maybe a relationship breakdown in a friend. Have you ever been in a fight? Because I can think of many occasions in my life, particularly when I was a young boy. I used to play football a lot. And when I was growing up, I used to play for a brilliant football team called Risborough Rangers. And we were the best team in our league. From like 9 all the way up to 15, we just won everything. But there was one particular team that was in our league who were called Bedgrove Dynamos. You can just tell by the name that. And for some reason, they just seemed to collect, particularly when I was younger, collect all of these players that had clearly hit puberty far too early. Like, I remember as like an 11-year-old playing football against this young boy that was my age that clearly had like a full defined beard. And it was like they were like our closest rivals. And every single time we played against them, it would end up sort of forming into this scrap between the players and then eventually the parents. I can think of in some of my friendships and relationships where I've had disagreements and sometimes a fight. But most recently, I want to tell you about a particular fight, a particular battle that I faced over a few days in my house. It was a Tuesday morning. And I woke up and I came downstairs and there was just something a little bit different and a little bit off in my house. When I came down the stairs, there was just this sort of like lingering smell that was coming from one of my downstairs cupboard, basically like our little pantry. And as I came down the stairs, there was like this smell that had been developing. And then what I could hear was these little scurrying footsteps, and I was like, oh no. I've read about the amount of mice and rats that have taken over Portsmouth over the last year. And so I did the dreaded slow motion like opening of the pantry like cupboard door. And what I could see was this tiny little mouse having a little nibble on my dog Disco's kibble. And there was just a little puncture hole in the bottom of the bag of food. And out came this little mouse with a tiny bit of kibble. It like saw me and frantically ran into the corner of this cupboard. And I was like, I've got it trapped. And as I tried to sort of, quite boldly and bravely made my way into the cupboard to see if I can like find some way of capturing this mice, I realized it was gone. I was like, oh no. So I had a little look, removed some stuff from the cupboard, and there, in the corner of my little pantry cupboard, was this tiny little hole. And the mouse had scurried out. And I was thinking, all right, the battle begins. For some of you that don't like rodents, this is going to get a lot worse. So I was like, me versus the mouse. A little bit of kibble, bit of a smell. We can sort this out. So I went to B&Q, and I went and got myself a good old-fashioned mouse trap. For those that are a little bit more sensitive, it's one of those bad ones, not one of those sticky ones where you can remove them, not one of those like, sort of keep them alive and then release them back into the wild, only for them to loop back around and come back into your pantry. I'm so sorry. It was one of the old school fashion ones where you put a little bit of peanut butter on it, and then you can hear the whoosh. So that's probably a bit too much. So I got this trap, bit of peanut butter, and I put it in, and I was waiting in the kitchen, not for very long, sadly, and I heard the little click, and I was like, got it, victory for Lewis Dean against the mouse. 20 minutes later, I can hear some more little scurries in the pantry. I'm like, there's more than one in this hole, isn't there? So I reset the trap, put it down by the hole, bit of peanut butter. About 15 minutes later, click. So I've got another one. Over the space of 3 days, ladies and gents, I caught 16 mice. It wasn't a nest, it was an infestation. And I have to admit, as disgusting as it might be, there was a moment where I felt like my entire house and family had been invaded. And I was like, and just to let you know, just for those a bit more like clean freaks in the room, the whole pantry has now been cleared out, scrubbed down, washed down. The whole has been sealed. But there was opposition in my house that needed dealing with. And what I want to speak on really quickly, particularly for the families and the supporters and the godparents and the parents of Rosalie and Billy and Faith, and also for Josie as she jumps into this pool to be baptized, is to be a follower of Jesus, not just in our lives, but to be a follower of Jesus. There will always be opposition. And over the last few weeks, we've been spending a little bit of time in a particular book in the Bible called Nehemiah. Nehemiah has been called by God to rebuild Jerusalem, the ancient city where God has dwelt for many, many centuries. And Nehemiah has been chosen to grab a group of God's people to rebuild this city that has been burnt down and broken down into rubble. And so Nehemiah takes it upon himself, chosen by God, to rebuild. And over the last couple of weeks, we've been looking at what it means to rebuild God's kingdom, rebuild our lives centered around Jesus. And today, I want to quickly talk to us about overcoming opposition. Overcoming opposition, because in our lives, we are going to face battles and challenges and difficulties, but also to be a follower of Jesus, there are often going to be opposition. Maybe a little bit like 16 mice in my tiny pantry cupboard. We are called to overcome opposition. And we're going to read just a little part of the story from Nehemiah, all about the opposition that Nehemiah and God's people face. The words are going to come up on the screen. If you've got Bibles on you, why don't you turn to it? And we're going to read from Nehemiah chapter 4. And it says this. This is Nehemiah speaking. So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half of its height. They've been rebuilding over about a year. They're rebuilding the city of Jerusalem. We rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height. For the people worked with all of their heart. But here comes the opposition. When Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the people of Ashdod heard that the repairs of the Jerusalem walls had gone ahead and that the gaps were being closed, they were very angry. The opposition, the different groups of people in and around the city are not happy that the city is being rebuilt for God's kingdom and for his purpose. They are very angry, and they all plotted together, not just individual groups, but they all gathered together against God and against Nehemiah and God's people. They all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and to stir up trouble against it. But we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. Meanwhile, the people in Judah said, the strength of the laborers is giving out. They're getting tired, and there is so much more rubble that we cannot rebuild the wall. Also, our enemy said, before they know it or see us, we will be right there among them, and we will kill them, and we will put an end to this work and to God's plans. Then the Jews, God's people who lived near them, came and told us 10 times over, wherever you turn, they will attack you. Therefore, I stationed some of the people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords, spears, and bows. After I looked these things over, I stood up and I said to the nobles and the officials and to the rest of the people, don't be afraid. Remember the Lord, your God, who is great and awesome, and fight for your families. When our enemies heard that we were aware of their plots and God had frustrated it, we all returned to the wall, each to our own work. From that day on, half the men did the work, while the other half were equipped with spears, shields, bows, and armors. The officials posted themselves behind all the people of Judah who were building the wall. Those who carried materials did their work with one hand and held a weapon in the other. And each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. But the man who sounded the trumpet stayed with me. Then I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is too extensive and spread out, and we are widely separated from each other along the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, join us there. Our God will fight for us. So we continued to work with half the men holding spears from the first light of dawn till the stars came out. At that time I also said to the people, have every man and his helper stayed inside Jerusalem at night so they can serve us as guards by night and as workers by day. Neither I nor my brothers nor my men nor the guards with me took off our clothes. Each had his weapon, even when he went for water. We are all going to face opposition, challenges, difficulties in our life. And each one of us, as we look to maybe explore a relationship with Jesus or to grow our faith or grow our relationship with Jesus, we are going to face opposition. So I think it's important to note how opposition works, because for the friends and the families and the supporters of Rosalie and of Billy and of Faith, and for Josie and her relationship and with her friends and those around her, it's worth saying to follow Jesus isn't always easy. And so we need to know how the opposition operates. Nehemiah and his friends, the people of God, they have opposition. It says that their opposition were very angry, and they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and stir up trouble against it. I just want to acknowledge for every single one of you, whether you are exploring faith, whether you're interested in faith, whether you've been following Jesus just a few weeks, or whether you've been following Jesus your whole life, there is opposition that is trying to separate you from the love and the plans and the purposes that God has for you. Let me just give you a potential option of some lists of some possible opposition. We've got criticism or mocking. We've got fear. We've got discouragement. We've got distraction. We've got sin, the things that separate us from God and others through temptation or through our actions. Sometimes our opposition can just be being comfortable, shame or guilt, spiritual warfare, the powers of the darkness trying to stop us, isolation, loneliness, offense, pride, doubt. This is just a list of some of the opposition that we might face in following Jesus. I wonder if you were to look at that list, what you would say your current opposition is right now. Maybe you're discouraged because you've been praying for an answer from God and you have yet to see it. Maybe you have just slipped into a season of just being comfortable and you're like, God, I'm happy with what I've got. Maybe for some of us, we're lonely and we're isolated. And the invitation for each and every one of us is, how do we overcome this opposition? How do we overcome the things that stop us from drawing closer to God or to one another? To see restoration in our families or friendships or our marriages, to see God move in our finances or our workplaces, whatever it might be. How do we overcome that opposition? I want to quickly give us 3 ways that we get from this story that we've just read from Nehemiah, how to overcome opposition. And it's these 3 things: work, watch, and what weapons do you have to fight against this opposition? So firstly, the way that we work, it says in this passage, Nehemiah 4, that God's people worked with all of their heart. Nehemiah and God's people are trying to rebuild the city of Jerusalem because they believe in the goodness and the kingdom of God. God's kingdom, which is love and peace and hope and justice. They believe in the work that they're doing, and they're doing it with all of their heart. And my invitation for you, how do you push against the opposition that you might face? Work in building God's kingdom with all of your heart. If you're exploring faith, come and get involved in our Alpha course, where you can ask the big questions of life and explore the Christian faith. Why don't you ask those questions? Work with it with all of your heart. Why don't you ask the questions? Why don't you explore Jesus with all of your heart? It says in a book in the Old Testament, in Jeremiah, that God has good plans for you, not to harm you, but to prosper you. And if you seek with all of your heart, you will find him. Will you seek God with all of your heart? Would you enter into the invitation to just take that one step closer to see what God is doing in your life? Because what we believe here at Harbour, and what we believe the invitation is for every single one of you, is that God loves you and he has good plans for your life. Why don't you step in with all your heart? Why don't you work towards finding out who this God is and what he is doing in your life? So we can work with all our hearts. Secondly, we can watch. It says in Nehemiah that the response to the opposition is that we prayed to our God and we posted a guard day and night to meet this threat. Where did they stand originally? They standed at the holes of the wall, the exposed places where the opposition could creep in. And I just want to encourage you, this is a little bit like the hole in the corner of my pantry. That there are things in your life, there are holes and gaps where the opposition can sneak in and begin to take charge. That there are holes in our thought processes. There are maybe lies that we've believed. There are things in our life that stops us from living a life in all of its fullness. And what we need to do is we need to watch. Maybe you've been slipping back into some bad thoughts about yourself. Or maybe you've been believing a particular word that someone close to you has said about you. Maybe there's some things in your life, like you've been slipping back into an addiction or an action. And that opposition sneaks in the places where you are just not watching. So like the little mice can make a little home and grow and multiply and push into the spaces of our life, this opposition wants to take over. How can you overcome that opposition? Well, thirdly, we need the weapons that God has given us. What are some of those weapons? Pray. If that's a new thing for you, or whether you've been praying your whole life, would you pray? Would you allow your heart to be aligned to God and allow him to speak into those oppositions, to speak into some of those addictions, to speak into some of those thought processes? Would you pray? What's another weapon? The Bible. Would you read the promises and the truth of who God is and who we are in him by spending time in the Bible? What's another weapon? Worship. We've just sung some beautiful songs that maybe sound quite nice, but more than what they sound like, it's the promises that are in them, that God is always with us and always for us, that he is our lighthouse that directs the path that we step, that he is the one that draws us back into his love. We can worship and declare the promises of God. Another weapon, it's community. If this is your first time with us, or you're here visiting for these christenings, just to say, we do this, not just every Sunday, our 5 services across our 3 locations, but we are passionate about community here at Harbour because we want to be a community that supports and loves and challenges and grows one another and has opportunities to explore faith. Another weapon against opposition is community. Why don't you come and join us on Sunday mornings and come and explore faith? Come and get to know people, be part of the community.